Hi
Alex, hey
Neil,
man,
how are you
how's it
doing?
going? I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm great. Watched the movie the other night, and I the first question that comes to mind is there's a lot of things that are going on here. There's a lot of really cool concepts that are all blended together, and I was trying to figure out what was the one that kind of germinated this idea in your head. Where did this originate from?
I think it originated from it was sort of a mixture of a couple of things where uh I really always wanted to shoot a small self-funded horror film at some point, like the challenge of that. And it's not totally true because AGC came in and gave us more money. So eventually the budget got doubled. But um I knew I wanted to do that. And when the pandemic happened, it was a perfect time to try out that idea. So when you look at reference films that are like that, it's like Paranormal Activity and Blair Witch. Um, so I knew that I wanted to be somewhere in the realm of horror and somewhere in the realm maybe of demonic possession. And that was one part of my brain. And then a totally unrelated part was this idea of this very specific type of computer graphics called volumetric capture, and wanting to use it in a feature film somehow. But because the technology is like very new and it's glitchy, it looks the way that it looks. You can't really change the way that the actors are going to be represented. Like all of those glitches and screw ups are going to be embedded into the movie. So I had to write the idea of the volumetric capture into the film in a way that it was narratively sort of backed up by being a prototype or something in the movie, that it was early technology. So really what happened was when you combine those two things, it's like where I came to was like, oh, well, that would be interesting as some kind of simulation that a person would go into. That's how you could use it. And if you're thinking along the lines of demonic possession, then maybe a person that is possessed, that it's their mind that you go into and you could run into the thing that is possessing them. It's roaming around trapped inside of this person, and both her consciousness and this thing are able to go into this virtual VR landscape. And that the film was really based on that idea, I guess.
And the watching that, and then when we get to later in the film, and you introduce that concept of the Vatican Black Ops Squad, and
Yeah.
that I almost wanted to see an entire movie just
Yeah.
of like these crews going and hunting demons and
Yeah.
fighting
Yeah.
them.
So that was also another idea that I had, which if there's ever another film that gets made in this world, that idea was based on. I love the concept of like what if mass murderers in history, like mass murder political leaders in history, were in fact demonically possessed. So if you wanted to do an exorcism on Stalin, how would you do that exactly? And so the idea was, well, what if the Vatican has some black ops unit that is able to take on, you know, people at that scale? So if another film ever got made, it's like you could scale it up to that sort of thinking. So that's yeah. I mean, I took that element, I took the VR stuff, and I took the low budget film approach and just sort of blended them.
And did filming this in a crazy year with all kinds of restrictions on filmmaking and differences in the ways you had to approach things, did the scale or the scope or anything change in the way you approach making it?
No, not really. I mean, it probably made it a little bit more difficult on a very stringent budget. I think if you're going to shoot stuff where there's a whole bunch of expenditure that isn't on screen and makes no difference to the audience, it makes difference. It makes a difference to the safety of the crew. It's a low budget film is probably not the best place to do that. You know, like if you're going to do that, you should be Warner Brothers or something and like be able to absorb all of those costs. So um, that was the only real hit. I mean, it was there was a slight financial hit, and then other than that, it wasn't too bad. You know, it was we could deal with it.
And did the work that you did with Oates and all those short films and everything that you did there, did that influence how you were approaching making this? Did that alter from the bigger films that you've made?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this even though this was not an Oates movie, the pretty much the entire crew were all Oates, and what that allowed for was I don't think that I could have done something at this budget level without having gone through that process with all of those people and us like working as a cohesive group like that. It just would not have been possible.
And horror is different. I mean, there's horror elements in all kinds of story parts that you've told in different films like that. But is there something in horror that did you want to try and do this as more straight traditional horror, or did you always envision that it was blending sci-fi and horror elements?
From a creative standpoint, the main driving force for me, the main challenge, like directorially, was to try to direct it in a way where there was a sense of like an unsettling sense for the audience, that it felt like there was a sense of dread the whole time. So that superseded it being horror or it being sci-fi. That sounds like it edges into horror more. Mm-hmm. So that was what my mind was on the whole time. It was just like, even if it's sunny and there's a whole bunch of vineyards and a lake, I wanted to still feel ominous. And so the shot selection and like the way we compose things is very different to the other films that I've done. But I didn't really care whether it was science fiction or horror ultimately. I think there were horror elements that I was interested in, like demonic possession, but I don't really mind what genre it falls into.
And watching the film, there were moments where certain other films popped into my head watching it, thinking, oh, this reminds me of this or that. Were there any particular films that you use as inspiration for anything in this film?
No, which is weird. It was a very strange, solitary movie that just sort of was made in a vacuum. But which ones are they? Tell me. I'm super curious. Like, what is it similar to?
Well, not similar entirely, but the film The Cell is very similar, where it's kind of going into the mind and you're going into this surreal world where things are a little bit different, than the rules don't always apply. Yeah. So going into the simulation, that reminded me
going into someone's mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense.
And then there's just the scene where Carly has the vision of and the bird head, and then flipping over and chasing around that whole sequence. And all I could think of is that is like the equivalent of the spider walk from The Exorcist. It's just the movement and everything. Watching that scene, it's unsettling and it's disturbing in the best way possible. So that was a great scene. I have a feeling that that's going to be something that's going to catch up a lot of people when they see it.
You know what is so insane about that scene? I mean, first of all, I guess you're correct. There's no question it's similar to The Exorcist in that sense. But I haven't seen that film in a few years, and it wasn't conscious reference. But man, shooting that scene was this amazing performer from Toronto. His name is Troy James, and he just did that. There's nothing happening. There's no CG. There's no prosthetic work. There's no wire rigs. There's like nothing except this guy who can do the stuff, and he can do it like at the drop of a hat. He'll just do it. You go to a restaurant with him, he can do it. So interesting. Yeah.
And I mean, that's a good point, that the practical effect there is, I mean, not even really effect, it's somebody doing it, but it evokes something different. Do you have a preference when it comes to practical versus CGI?
I mean, the general rule should always be, if you can do it practically, people use CG too liberally. It's like, you should only use it when you have to use it. Why would you use it if you don't have to use it? Like, there's something incredibly bizarre that happened with this movie in relation to that question, which is we built a 1980s style 7-foot monster suit, which is what we filmed with live action cameras in certain scenes in the movie. But when she runs into it in the simulation, that we took the suit performer and the suit and put them into a volume capture environment, which then turned it into a CG object. So I don't know if that's really happened before, where a prosthetic Nightmare on Elm Street thing got digitized and dropped into a 3D environment. It's like, it endlessly cracks me up that happened, but it's how it worked.
And speaking of that design, I mean, when you're thinking of monsters throughout horror history, birds don't typically look like gigantic beasts like this. Was that
Yeah.
something like, how did the genesis of that design come about?
That seriously, the design of the demon cracks me up every time I see it. I really love it as well because it's just weird. But I don't know where it came from. I think where maybe it came from was the plague masks, which obviously would be connected to the pandemic on some subconscious level. And I was referencing them a lot. And I actually, Sam actually wears one in the nightmare sequence that you were talking about. She takes it out of her bag. So I think that may have driven the idea of a beak, and then it just sort of extrapolated from there.
So I know this is like, it's a new movie. It's brand new. It's coming out now. So you're in the midst of that. I would be remiss if I didn't ask what's next. Like, is there something, are you looking to do another horror film? I mean, you've got two projects that are very well publicized that didn't come to fruition in recent years that I can say very easily, I was so excited that they were coming and then they didn't.
Yeah.
Is there any chance that those could ever happen again, or are you going in a totally different direction?
I don't think there's any chance Alien will happen with me. RoboCop, I don't know either, but RoboCop maybe stands more of a chance just because of the politics behind it. But I mean, there's absolutely no plan for that either. Everything that I'm working on at the moment is stuff that I've come up with. There's one project that I think is the next one that I'm doing that I'm trying to put together right now that I love. So I think that's the next thing that I'm doing.
And with obviously the whole climate in terms of where things happen, big screen, streaming, television, is doing like a long form project on streaming or television something that you would ever consider doing?
Yeah. I have a couple that I'm putting together.
And when it comes to District 9, we have all talked about, I mean, the rumor mill is always up. Is there going to be a sequel? Is there going to be a follow-up? We keep hearing maybe. Is there? I mean, is that something that's on the horizon? Is that something that could be a TV show?
I don't think it'll be a TV show. I think it'll be a sequel. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're writing that script. It's not as immediate as the film I was just talking about, but it's within the near future for sure.
And would that be something that you would approach it in the same style that you did the original film? Or did doing something smaller like this, does that give you a maybe trying to shake things up?
No, it should be identical to the first one in terms of style. Yeah.
And from all the shorts, all the Oates shorts that were out there, would any of those be something that could potentially be expanded into a feature film? Is that something that you've been thinking about?
No, those are designed to, like, Oates hopefully has a real future, but it's 1000% unrelated to Hollywood.
Okay.
So those nothing from Oates would ever make its way over into Hollywood, but there could be more of it. So
is that in development? Is there something coming, or is that something that's just kind of possible?
It's more the politics of setting up the company first to be able to do the work, if that makes sense. So the challenge right now is politically structuring what Oates is to then like get the engine started to do what it wants to do.
Got it.
Yeah. And
I mean, Alien was a huge franchise that I would love to see what you were going to do there. RoboCop's another huge franchise. Are there, and not saying that anything's in talks or anything like that, but are there any other established franchises that you would be interested in either carrying on or reinventing or getting involved in?
I mean, creatively, yes. Creatively, yes, for sure. Practically, probably not. Just given the experience of Halo and Alien, it's like, I'm tired of working on IP that I don't have control over, where the rug can get pulled out from underneath you. And so unless there was a way to really be sure about being in control of what I was working on and investing time in, politically I would say no, but creatively for sure. I mean, there's a million things that exist out there that would be amazing to riff on and to be my own directorial take on that thing. So,
and circling back to this movie with the genre, I mean, I would definitely say that there are scary things in all the films that you've done, whether it's technologically scary or just truly scary sequences. There's the body horror elements that are in there in places.
Yeah.
Would you ever imagine playing in a project that would not have any sci-fi or horror elements, or is that the wheelhouse you want to remain in? Like, could you see yourself doing something that is like a straight comedy or a straight drama without any of those trappings?
Yes, for sure. But I would say that I feel like in the near future, I do want to do a few films that still have some sort of fantastical element to them before I start doing that. But absolutely, I mean, I think, yeah, I think evolving into that as other genres to work in would be, is highly interesting to me.
And in this film, was there anything, because you pulled off a lot of pretty stellar shots in here. There's some really crazy things. The ending kept me guessing the whole time going in there. I love the way that it was handled. Was there anything that you had envisioned in the film from the script standpoint that you were not able to make on screen?
You mean from the script standpoint, not able to make on screen because of budget, or what would the factor be that made it not be on screen?
Like that you couldn't figure out a way to execute it visually.
Oh, I see what you mean. No, I mean, you can always problem solve. You can always do that, right? The only reason you wouldn't be able to do something is because you run out of money.
Sure.
And that kind of did happen on this film. But I mean, we stuffed so much into like 1.9 million that there was no room left really for anything. So, yeah, if anything was not done, it was just because there was no money.
And the score itself too was a great score. And
I love the score, man. I'm glad
good.
I'm glad you brought that up. I fucking love the score for it. Ola is he's a video game composer from Sweden, and I listen to a ton of music all the time. And I contacted him because of his score for The Division. And I was like, dude, would you do a horror film? And he was like, I don't really do films. and then I sort of talked him into it, and he started sending me examples and stuff and going back and forward. And I absolutely love what he did.
And was that a conscious decision that because he did video games, you wanted him because of how there's that simulation element to it?
No. It was just purely his sound as an artist that I loved. I felt like he has this thing where it feels ominous and dark, but it feels synthy and electronic. And it also feels like it gets huge. Like it gets kind of Zimmer-esque.
Yeah.
And in this film, it was like, I always say that everything to do with demonic was like an exercise in restraint. Everything was about like pulling back. And his score kind of does that. It's like you can feel that it's on the edge of just sort of getting massive, and it always is teetering on the edge the whole time. But it also feels dark, and I really just love what Ola did.
And I think that in listening to it, like at the beginning, it lulls you in when you're listening to it because it's there and it keeps that rhythm going. And then as the intensity starts to ratchet up, it just follows along beautifully with everything that's happening in the film.
Yeah.
The first thing I do whenever I watch a film and I hear a score like that, I'm online trying to figure out who it was and to see what other scores that they've done. So I saw he'd only done video games really before this.
Yeah.
Now I want to go play some of those games that I haven't played before just because of music. But it was really great.
Yeah, just listen to his stuff. Like, I mean, it's so good. He just has such a knack for using synth in an orchestral large way, and also this kind of ominous deep sort of sub bass atmospheric stuff too. And
visually there's a lot of daylight in this film. That there's a lot of darkness in certain sequences, but because you did a lot in the day, was that intentional because it's unsettling to see horror during the day?
It was completely intentional. The whole it goes back to what I was saying before about wanting to just create this feeling of dread and sort of like an unsettling, gross feeling for the audience. And the daylight played a big role in that. It was like that was a challenge that I wanted to see if I could do.
Well, it was awesome. I mean, I love the film. It was a great experience. It takes a lot to scare me, and it's very hard for me when I'm watching a horror film because if everybody says it's the scariest thing you've ever seen. And then I watch it. I'm like, that wasn't scary at all. And I'm telling you, the bird walk, I'm calling it the bird walk scene. That bird walk scene messed me up. The
one in the middle of the movie.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
When
yeah,
with the mask and she does the flip,
Yeah.
that knocked it out of the park for me. So I really
Awesome.
appreciate it. And thank you so much for your time.
Yeah. Thanks, Alex. That's cool.
Have a great one.
Okay. You too.
Bye.
How is this possible? Do you know what this place is?
Your mother, Angela, she's our patient.
I've been out of touch with her for a very long time. Oh my God.
Her mind is very active in the simulation.
Simulation.
She went on a homicidal rampage. This is your chance to ask her why.
Mom?
Carly, you have to go. You have to go.
Guys, please let me out! Can you hear me? Guys!
What are we doing?
No. Just wait.
Are you sure that you haven't been having any hallucinations outside of the simulation? Demonic possession. It could be real.
I can't do this.
You want to end up like your mother. The Vatican has been funding a black ops unit, using priests like soldiers.
Now that it's free, it won't stop coming for you.